at sea. You want to keep the resource in the sea at sustainable levels. Once it's been illegally harvested, the stock has been impacted. So I think justifiably, but it's the very expensive end of compliance. And right through this trade chain, every single opportunity there is an opportunity to disrupt. Wherever you've got a controlled measure that can be enforced, you have an opportunity to disrupt. And I think if we just reflect on that pyramid that Yves showed yesterday, the more opportunities for disrupting illegal catch and trade, I think the higher we can get in that pyramid and the just attitudes and behavior. So we also have fisheries control officers, enforcement officials playing a role through the trade chain. They will check, for instance, processing establishments, check invoices, permits, and so on at various stages. In some cases, but not always, you'll have fisheries compliance officials playing a role at border posts, imports, so monitoring import and export of seafood. But that's not always the case. That's often where customs plays that predominant role. And as we know, there's not enough interaction between customs and fisheries. There's an assumption, I think, that by fisheries that, well, the trade is largely international trade. That's being largely regulated by customs, although it is within their mandate. And then, the thing about all those trade-related activities is that at every point in that trade chain, there's a permit, and that permit's got information on it. There's a lot of data that's being collected right through that period. And my experience is that that data is not being analyzed sufficiently. I think we have far more of a focus on analyzing the at-sea data, the catch data, the VMS data, the observer data. There's a huge untapped data resource that's linked to the trade chain. Not enough cross-referencing, not enough comparative analysis. I think from a compliance point of view, this trade chain as well, it provides enormous challenges. Those challenges are also opportunities, of course. But you've got seafood being traded in a processed form. It could be dried, it could be filleted, frozen. If it's in a container, as Bernie showed, you're facing a huge task. So I'm going to talk through a couple of examples that just highlight the challenges, reflecting again as well on the potential for improved trade data analysis and how that can contribute to tackling fish crime. So this is a photo that I took about 4 years ago, I guess, in Dubai, UAE, and these are sharks that came across from Oman. There were probably about 4 or 5 freezer trucks that came over, and apparently these trips are happening almost daily. They're brought at night to the night market, to the fish market in Dubai, and they then bought and finned. I don't know what happens to the meat. I wasn't there long enough to watch the transaction and any processing, but the main market here is for the fins. And it's quite a gruesome photo, but really just this whole long wharf, just all these big dead sharks lined up. Most of them were big-eyed thresher sharks, which catch is prohibited by IOTC for IOTC member states and cooperating non-contracting parties. And Oman's a member of IOTC. I don't know whether the vessels were caught by an Oman flag vessel, but they came from Oman. So at some point, the catch wasn't in compliance with an RFMO provision. Now they're in trade though. And from this point onwards, the trade will be legal. There's no need for anything to be hidden. For any misdeclaration to take place, the trade can be completely legal. Then we have smooth, I think it's a smooth hammerhead, which at the time was not listed on CITES, but it now is, and it requires CITES trade documentation. And for a compliance official at each point in this, to be able to firstly identify the shark to a species level and know, this is a hammerhead shark of a species that's covered by CITES, or that species is not meant to be caught in terms of an RFMO, What does the documentation look like? What should the species look like? Once the fins have been cut off now, the fins have to be identified to a species level. So there are significant challenges for trade-related compliance enforcement. So Bernie spoke this morning about abalone poaching and trade. And really it provides one of the most dramatic examples of fisheries crime. I really feel almost perhaps all wildlife crime on the African continent. I know we've faced at the moment with a real crisis with rhino poaching, with elephant poaching. But this is a crisis of its own, if not having as much of an impact on the species, that the social impacts are devastating. It's syndicated crime that's been involved, drugs, local gangs, everything else. You can imagine, 3% of what is being taken out of the water is taken out legally. More than 95% is being poached. And this hasn't just been going on for 1 or 2 years. This is not boom and bust. It's been going on for decades, really. So there's a real crisis here. So unfortunately, though, this is just not, this sort of analysis can be useful because it can show you the volume, the extent of the crime that you're dealing with. But it's not really something that many customs agencies actually, that they do. This is also based on analysis of trade data. But in this case, we're looking at values. And what's interesting about this graph, I'm showing you this graph, is because it shows that this is just for Hong Kong, it's just for dried abalone, but it's showing that abalone's being imported not just from South Africa, but from Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, and Kenya. Now, our species is an endemic species. There's a very small abalone farm in Namibia. The bottom line is that South Africa really should be the only country that's exporting any sizable quantities of abalone and a small amount from Namibia. There's no processing outside of South Africa. Anything that's coming from those other countries is guaranteed to be poached abalone. Some of them are landlocked, Zimbabwe, Zambia, landlocked countries. So important information for compliance to know the trade routes. So then that also gives information on focusing on specific border posts, working with counterparts in those countries to make them aware of this dynamic, seeing what possible legal processes could be developed for tackling trade once it's left the country. We also don't know if it's actually always all physically leaving the country. One possibility could be that it's going into the bonded warehouse, let's say at Tambo International Airport up in Johannesburg. It never leaves the country, but forged permits are produced that show that it's in the bonded warehouse and it's come through Zambia. It's now caught illegally. Once it's in the bonded warehouse with the forged documents, it's now legally in trade. And I'm not sure if this is what's happening, it's a possibility, but it could be apparently a way then for organized crime to get forex into countries where they have operations. If they need to get money into Zambia, they can show that there's a trade with Zambian product, they need to pay the exporter in Zambia. Now that facilitates money laundering. These sorts of things, this sort of information can be really useful in generating interest from other agencies. Financial Intelligence Center in this country and equivalent agencies in other countries that are trying to follow the money that's linked to organized crime. This sort of information I know is useful and valuable to them. I'd also just like you to look, probably can't see the numbers, especially at the back, but this is a value related graph. So we're looking at most years between, let's say, $30 and $40 million in value, of which the majority of that would be illegal. Now, if you convert that into South African rands, just for the dried abalone, it's a lot of money. It's a good way to get Treasury interested, to motivate for increased budgets for compliance. They're not going to be that interested in 2,000 tons of poached abalone being exported illegally, but they're going to be very interested if you tell them that they're losing up to R1 billion a year in illegally. There's loss of revenue and the other impacts. I'll just have to move on a bit. So I will just briefly explain how is this possible. Essentially what is happening is that the product is being caught illegally, and through the trade system it's being turned into a legal product. This is what happened with the Bengals case as well, what happens with abalone. The big risk is in the country where you're exporting the product. That's where most of the enforcement is, that's where the concern is. So you pack your abalone, your lobster, whatever it is, into a container with whatever else it might be, polypropylene balls, duvets, plastic bags, you name it, and you must declare it. It could be car spares, bathroom accessories, computers, it doesn't matter. On the import side, the importing authorities aren't interested in your export permit. They don't want to know about the export permit. You complete the import permit, and there's no risk of misdeclaration. You quite openly declare importing duvets and abalone in a container. There's no risk, there's no national legislation that prevents you or could in any way address this. And so this is how an illegal product is turned into a legal product. This is a real challenge. This is an example. This is actually a case that Bernie was talking about, where you had sardines and abalone packed into the same container, exported as sardines. I'm not sure what would have happened on the import side because they got the container turned back, but they've been sensible. They would have declared it as abalone and sardines together in a container so as not to risk misdeclaration. Very briefly, then I only have a few minutes left. This is the Bengals case as well. So what I was interested, I looked back in about 2012 to see, well, what did the trade data look like if we compared what South Africa exported to the US at the time when Bengals was operating with what the US reported as imports. And as expected, there's a big difference. There's that big bubble, Bengals bubble there. And that's the difference. The difference is really what was being poached and exported illegally, because there was no risk on the import side of declaring it as abalone. What was interesting in subsequent years, though, is that it hasn't gone away. And Bernie said, can't give any details, but there are ongoing investigations into illegal lobster poaching and trade. And my thinking was, as Bernie said, if they hadn't had that informant telling them about the Bengals trade to the US, it could have gone on for years. If someone had been doing data analysis in 98, 99 and seen this big difference, maybe they would have alerted and said, look, you've got to look, but particularly at consignments that are going out to the US, we think that's where our poached abalone is going. Sorry, lobster. To summarize the challenges, the international trade system makes it too easy to order illegally caught fish. It's very difficult to change the system. The HS, the harmonized system, the standardized system, often doesn't contain sufficient detail of fish products. Frozen fish other or something, it doesn't tell you that it's a hammerhead shark. But sometimes import data can provide that level of detail, which it does, for instance, with abalone. So it's about understanding the systems. Insufficient interagency cooperation, especially between customs and fisheries. That's both within a country, but also between countries. The capacity to deal with these massive volumes of fish products in international trade makes inspection very challenging. Numerous trade documents, knowledge of the requirements, the confidence to know exactly what is required with a trade situation, what document is needed, what should be written on that document, how does that match up with what's in the box. Identification of especially processed fish products in trade, and then corruption, which has been mentioned a couple of times this morning already. Solutions. This is a big thing for me. And analysis of trade data. Quite a few of you here today have heard me. I've been banging this drum for many years, but I think we know by now that this can add value to compliance efforts. There's so much data out there, and we live in an age where access to that data is easy. There's software applications that can bring this disparate data together, do the analysis, do the cross-referencing, and make us more informed of people tackling fish crime about what happens to that product after it's left the sea, after it's hit the wharf, somehow it ends up being legal on a plate in a restaurant, in a retail outlet somewhere across the world. Still, to deal with the problem with import and export permits, see what is possible working within the WCO and the HS system to move towards electronic permitting, to move towards a single import-export permit. Something needs to be done to address a system that is not helping us, is working against us. Continuous efforts like with the symposium to build interagency collaboration. And then we have a real opportunity to actively engage. We've got some fantastic international institutions. We heard yesterday from UNODC, there's the WCO, Interpol. We heard from Interpol as well yesterday, CITES, to build capacity and to obtain and share information for future collaboration. And my last slide, corruption, tackle corruption. Building knowledge on capacity on trade document requirements, the assessment of those documents, validation of those documents, continuous capacity building really, and the same for species identification. And I am done, so thank you very much.
In this instance, I'm going to talk about water and memory. I'm going to talk about really fundamental memory that water has. And my story is going to begin, and you need to draw a little mental picture of this, of a stream somewhere up in the mountains. Could be any mountains, anywhere. And a group of people are told that this particular stream, where this valley is and that those mountains, is absolutely one of the most scenic areas in the whole world. And so they get together and decide to travel and visit the stream and do this wonderful hike in nature. So they travel right across continents with all their gear. They move by rail, train, bus, whatever, and they get to this wonderful scenic scene. And they start their walk. And right beside them is this little stream coming down off the mountain. This little stream, at that point, is basically pristine. It has very, very, very little sign of any nutrient, of any pollution. And the hikers walk along and the scenes are magic. And of course it's a hot day, so they put on suntan lotion and creams on their lips. And as would be the case, it gets hotter and hotter, so they decide to have a swim in one of the pools that this little stream has. So off they go and have a swim, and now they wash off the suntan lotion and all the creams that they've been having smeared over their bodies. And on top of that, they actually also release some body fluids into that stream. After all, it's in the middle of nowhere, so who's it going to affect? I mean, it's just a few of us here, you know. It's going to be washed away. It'll be just dissipated in the mass of water. However, some of the party have been taking some antibiotics. Some of the ladies are on birth control tablets. And some of them actually have a urinary disease. And so at that point, they introduce what would be the first beginnings of pollution and toxic elements. And this is where the memory begins. That stream takes that little plug of the first pollutant and the first nutrients and takes it on its way down the mountain. And so the hikers carry on hiking, they finish their hike, and they end up at a village. And this village is very rural. It has the most rudimentary sewage systems. But again, they note that this sewage system discharges into the same stream that they have just been walking along. And so the nutrient levels increase. And as they walk down the valley, so the villages get larger and larger. And then they come into an agricultural area and they see the farmers are busy farming away and they are spraying their crops with water from the stream. But they also notice that there's some machines growing up and down spraying pesticide. And again, this is washed off into this little stream. So the memory in the stream, this water is actually carrying all these bits of memory down, all the way down to where it eventually will end up, either in a great big dam or out into the sea. Now we think that, the water will wash away the sins of the world, but it really doesn't anymore. It may have done so many hundreds of years ago, but it doesn't do that anymore. Because what we are actually producing in terms of our toxic, now put it in inverted commas, our toxic chemicals are today so potent and are so powerful that they have an enormous effect when released into nature. There are, I think, 6 rivers in England that are highly protected. All the people that live along the banks of those rivers have to sign and agree that they will do absolutely nothing to damage the river. And about 2 years ago, I think, someone released about 2 or 3 tablespoons of a toxic poison into the river. It ended up killing every bit of marine life, fish life, for a distance of over 6 miles down that river. And that was literally from 1 or 2 tablespoons of toxic. So we produce all these chemicals and we actually don't really fully understand, in all our cleverness, we don't really fully understand what happens when they are unleashed into nature. So the memory I'm talking about is really how water will carry down and along its path what we do on its banks. And today, facing probably 70% of the dams is this huge problem of cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria, or blue-green or blue algae as it's commonly known, will become prevalent because it is fed. It is fed by over fertilization on farmers' lands, high volumes of nitrates and phosphates running off the fields into the stream and from there into the dam. And I think you might remember just recently, one of the big lakes, one of the cities off the big lake, they suddenly had a cyanobacteria bloom, and they had to, I think there were 500,000 people or 600,000 people that had to be told immediately not to use any water out of their taps. And they had to bring the army in and tanker water, and this would be a modern American city. So it can happen anywhere. And what we have to start really working at is how we change and look after or modify or reduce the memory of these things that the water is carrying down. So we can do something at point A, seemingly very innocuous. It travels down and many kilometers, maybe even miles, hundreds of miles away, we will have effect B. And it's related because of the memory that is carried by the water. If we actually think carefully about it, it can be really simple everyday precautions that we can take to minimize. At this stage, the message that I think needs to get across is how do we minimize this memory? How do we make that memory as small as possible? And this goes right into the rural villages, it goes into the cities, it goes into every tier of humanity. That we have to start to change the way that we actually consider water. Today, water has been made very ubiquitous to the availability of very ubiquitous to almost all of humanity. But what I was actually amazed to read or hear on the news just a couple of days ago, it's now World Water Week at the moment, and 4 countries in the world use 60% of all the drinking water available.
Is that because of the quantity?
Yes. China being one of them, India being another, obviously massive population, America being another. And the rest of the world, take those countries away, are down to the other 40%. Agriculture uses about 48%, and human consumption requires approximately 12%. So there are at the moment massive amounts of water that are being used within certain spheres or in certain tiers. And if that memory goes into those, that effect on that becomes that much greater. So if you look at the issue of the antibiotics, for instance, when you take an antibiotic, you don't consume it. You know, you swallow the tablets or the fluid. It stays in your body for a period of time, and you excrete it complete as it is. It carries on down into the water and carries on being an antibiotic. So we just don't lose, it doesn't get dissipated. And if we look at the sewage systems of the world that are still discharging massive amount of sewage, we're discharging over 786,000 tons of effluent into the seas on our coast in South Africa per day. Well, the days of that being dissipated and gone, I'm afraid, are just not happening, because the toxicity levels of those discharges are so high that you can't tell the fish, well, sorry, there's that bubble of toxicity, don't swim in that. That fish is going to swim through that. And of course we know that mercury is so high now that there are some places that are advocating you only have fish once a month because the mercury levels have become so high. Now that is indicative of the fact that the water is actually not able to dissipate, or the sheer population numbers are so great that we are not dissipating or able to dissipate the mercury in a small enough quantity for it to be safe, because it gets into the fish and there it remains in the flesh. So if we talk about memory, what I want to put across here is that if we consider how we behave and how we treat water, we need to understand that what we do to that water, we don't damage the water. H2O is H2O. We can pour it down the side of a mountain for thousands of feet and bash it off the rocks and it still comes up as water at the bottom. We can boil it and steam it away. It'll just reconstitute again. So we don't actually damage the H2O. What damage we do is what we add to the H2O. And that is not fully appreciated in many, many instances. So the actual molecules of hydrogen and oxygen themselves, they remain intact, but they are incredibly efficient as a solvent to carry away and move these various bits and pieces, and that is the memory that I'm trying to put across here. So if we think to ourselves, well, if we do this to this water, we're putting something into it, and that something we put into it is like putting something into your brain. You learn how to do something, so it kind of learns what you've done, and it carries that through faithfully. It will move it without modification. It'll just take it along and move it to point B. So the memory stays in that water and takes it out. And of course, I suppose it really is a matter of time. Most major cities in the world are actually positioned on major rivers, and most of them are actually right where the river discharges into the sea. So at that time, way back 200 years or 300 years ago, it was probably the port where the ships arrived, and that's where the first people landed. So the cities grew. So cities now will have to start changing, where they can't have a simple system whereby they create the mess and we dump it into the river, it disappears into the sea. Cities are going to have to change. They're going to have to become circular. In other words, where they are creating the waste, it no longer gets into any water body. It is dealt with separately. It is taken out and treated, and actually then put back into the farming around it. So you create a circular operation which will absorb and dissipate into the soil for plant to take up the nutrients of phosphates and nitrates. And so the fundamentals are like that have got to happen. Now, I was looking at the program for World Week, and I'm a little bit surprised that the program doesn't actually boil down to simple fundamentals like this issue of memory. It talks about the originator of the memory must start to think about minimizing it. and keeping keeping and look and see what they are doing. Can we use a different product which is more organic rather than inorganic? Or can we use? Do we have to put so much on our face? Can we perhaps not have it? Can we put it on every second day? Can we change our thinking about that whole aspect of putting these memory chips, as it were, into the water? And that has to happen, because we're running out of water. We're running out of water which is suitable for human consumption. We're not running out of water. I mean, the world's, there's so much water in the world that there's plenty there. We can take it out of the ocean and desalinate it and all the rest of it. But certainly, in terms of fresh water, natural fresh water, we are certainly running out. I do know that ozone is probably in fact, it is the best disinfectant that we know of. It cleans water like you would not believe. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We introduced ozone in the Middle East to clean grey water, and it really, if you study it on ozone, it's incredible, and it's very easy to actually work with. If it can be dangerous in a closed room if you walk in and you haven't taken the necessary precautions, but no one would ever do that. Or certainly, if you had a plant like that, you'd have a warning system that would as soon as the ozone level reached a certain point, it would switch off. But ozone dissipates very, very quickly. It stays in the water, very cold water, for maybe 10 or 15 or 20 minutes at most. It then dissipates completely into the atmosphere. But while it's doing that, it will remove as near as 99% of everything that you can possibly think of. Pesticides, all the chemicals, the whole works. And that is quite easy to use. And it's becoming now very easy to put into your home. So what is happening is, for instance, that water in the mountains that has come down with all these memory bits and pieces and is treated, is delivered through the pipeline to your house. And it is deemed as being suitable for drinking. But to do so, they've had to put in chlorine to keep you disinfected all the way to where you are, because chlorine has a long residual time in the pipework. And so therefore, from time to time, they get the mixture wrong, because there's people using a lot of water some days on a hot day, then they don't use so much. So it's quite difficult to actually fine-tune the amount of chlorine. So they tend to overdose, and sometimes if you have a shower, you'll smell the chlorine, or you boil a kettle of water and make some tea and it tastes awful because the chlorine's gone up. So we ozonate all our water now for our house, even though it has been proved to be absolutely perfect for drinking. We have to start to learn from nature and use nature to find the solutions. And we might err incorrectly, not have a very good yield. Then we would have to go back again and rebalance. It's not going to be a one-off, to get it right the first time. But if we take England now, they finally are going to allow the use of pesticides, because they were told that if you don't use it, you're going to lose your crops. Well, that's almost like putting a gun to the government's head. You're going to lose your crops, and the people are going to starve. But where's the third solution, the third option? In everything, there's always many options. Use the pesticide, or don't use the pesticide, or use only some of the pesticide in low level. And I think it would have been appropriate for the government to say, well, okay, you say we're going to lose our crops, but let us legislate that in 1 or 2 counties they will use no pesticide. Plant ordinarily, and if there's a failure, the government will come to the party and say, look, we made a mistake. We will recompense the farmer, so that the farmer's not taking the brunt of it. And then you run that parallel and you see, well, that county, they used pesticide. This county, they didn't use pesticide. Oh my goodness, they didn't lose the crop. Then you have an ability to do the measuring. And then maybe another county, you say, well, now 50% of the crop. So you balance out until you find, and you minimize and minimize and minimize. But right now, it's an all or nothing, and they get scared to hell about this, and so virtually a gun is held to the head of the decision makers, And even though there were some 200 scientific papers presented to prove that this wouldn't happen, the decision that Britain took, very, very worryingly, is to carry on and use the pesticide. If we go back to nature and you look at a simple tree and how it transpires and it draws water, transpires, and it creates a whole system of continuity. All the time we are breaking this continuity down. We are very deft as humans to break nature's continuity. And we need to go back again and look at re-establishing nature's continuity. And so if we look at the cry, well, we had to do this because we got to feed the millions or the billions, you take that at face value to start off with and say, well, fine, but then we need to also take an area and start to re-establish what was removed from there. And that is where Luke was explaining with his seeds, for instance, how that can be done. And it's going to take a gargantuan effort. You might put down 10,000 of those seeds and only get maybe 1,000 finally germinating the first year or the second year. Then we will start to correct the amount of water. But it's not going to be done instantly. There's no instant fix about it. And whether we believe in global warming or not, the weathers are changed. It's warming. Even there's an article now given on the effect of El Nino that's going to have on the whole of southern Africa. Zimbabwe is a basket case from a food point of view, total basket case. Zambia is similar. South Africa is going to be hit by El Nino. And this is likely to take 6 to 8 months that is going to happen. It might last longer, even into 18 months they're worried about. Now, El Nino is not a new thing. It's happened cyclically over goodness knows how long go back. And that energy that El Nino has, where the water temperature in the ocean is maybe a half a degree higher than it would normally be, but is spread over such an enormous area, represents so much energy that we can't even begin to calculate how much of an engine that is in driving the weather. I spoke to someone a couple of years ago about El Nino, and I figured out that it was actually very shallow. I thought it was only maybe a meter of water, maybe deeper, 1.5 meters, and he said to me, no, the water can be 30 or 40 meters deep, and it can stretch from here all the way to Australia. So you imagine a stretch of water the size of one of the oceans that suddenly has its temperature changed by half a degree, and you had to say, well, let's generate the electricity and warm that ocean up. It's an amount of energy that we can't even begin to comprehend. And when that energy is released, as it is on our weather patterns, that's going to happen. So the natural effects of warming have been around for a long, long time. The corals show us that. There's plenty of evidence of that. So tackling global warming and so on and so forth, I think, has to be done in a number of facets. We know that the carbon dioxide is the major issue, and that has to be reduced dramatically. But right away, I would believe that I would start a whole process of planting, slowly but surely, in the rural areas, and reclaiming. Even if you had to reclaim a half a kilometer of that desert advance in 1 year, that would be an enormous gain. And over a period of years, the effects would start to happen. And there would be a change. The cooling would happen. The trees would create a cooling. There would be transpiration. So you would slowly engineer a change in what's happening there. And unfortunately, it would appear that we seem to go more and more into farming intensively as opposed to farming extensively. Now, all our monoculture, no matter where you look at it, is all farming intensively. We think, well, we've got this little area, and we're going to intensify it, and we're going to really, really optimize what we can do on that bit of land. So what will happen is that we have to start changing our farming methods to start looking at farming extensively. In other words, intensively, we only focus on our little piece of land. We don't really look beyond the edge of our little spot at what's happening. Meanwhile, on the other side of the hill, on the other side of the valley, or 2 valleys away and 2 hills away, it's a nightmare. Now let me go back again, and many years ago I was doing deep ploughing for the farming community in the vineyards. And I got a call from a very well-known farm. They had decided to put up a piggery and use the water that they used to wash out the stalls for nutrient for their vineyards. And I think they had 400 pigs, and it was beautifully laid out. I mean, it really was. They were all on clean as a whistle, and there was this great big tank that would tip and flush through underneath their stalls, and all that water went into a container, and it had a belt which took away the hairs, and that water was then put into a tanker, and they went around their vines, and they actually fed this water to their vineyards. And of course the vineyards blossomed like you wouldn't believe. But of course eventually they had too much, so they phoned the farmer next door. How about, would you like a tanker or two? It'll cost you that? Yeah, sure. So they were tankering it to their farmers across, but then it was more. And eventually they figured out, well, it was now time to put up a system to treat some of the effluent from those pigs. And at that time I had an earthmoving business, and I got there and they spoke to me and told me what they wanted to do. And I was to dig out this serpentine sort of a trench and make a serpentine sort of a dam, and they would then put the water into that. So I questioned them. I said, it's interesting that you want to do this. What provoked this? He said, well, you know, we used to have this. We have this excess. So what we did is we put a pump in, and we put these big sprayers down on the area where it's not good enough for vineyards, and we just sprayed this water over the veld. And he said the grass grew and it was wonderful. And he said all of a sudden the grass stopped growing. What's gone wrong? What could possibly go wrong? So they phoned up the extension officer and said, look, we've got some problem here. You know, we're doing this, and the extension officers rush out there, and they had one look at this lot. They dug a few test holes and said, stop, no more spraying. They had, over a period of a few years, put so much nutrient onto that grass area that they actually...
Salinated.
Yeah, no, it had too much phosphate nitrate. But the problem was that they were uphill to the Berg River. And so when we had our rains, all that surface on the soil washed straight down into the Berg River. And we're talking about a considerable area. We're not talking about a small, rugby field. This was massive. And they stopped immediately and said, no, you are not allowed to take anything out there. You will have to treat all the water on this place. And that was just because of not even going to buy phosphate and nitrates from the chemical company. This was just out of there. I then found out that the 400 pigs created as much nutrient as 12,000 humans. So we dug this whole place out, and they got to treat it and restored the whole issue. And it took a long time, lots of rainfalls, seasons thereafter, to leach that extra nutrient out, and for the grasses to start to regrow again and actually consume it before it ended up in the Berg River. So here was a very innocent, wonderful plan to fertilize naturally some vineyards. We're not going to go and buy the chemicals, whatever they were. We're going to use nature's own nutrient to do it. And that flipped right over. It completely flipped its lid. And that was an absolute eye-opener. I mean, I really didn't think hard that could happen, but I saw it. It was as obvious as can be. And of course the pH also changed. And at that time, they did a very interesting experiment of just what pH will do to growth. Nothing else. Nitwa Bay is the testing, the laboratory where they do a lot of the research on vineyards and stuff like that. And they had a farmer's day, and what they had done, they had a little series of little punnets, these little flat punnets that you get at the nursery, and they had planted grasses in them. And they had a long table, and behind the table they had numbers. So and these were pH, from acidic going to neutral and going to alkaline. And each punnet It's just grass growing in it. And each punnet was watered with the acidic or alkaline level pH representative of the number on the wall. And it was staggering, Judy. At the acidic end and the alkaline end, the grass was so high. And as you look, there was this natural graph, how the grasses got taller and taller and taller until neutral. And then got shorter and shorter and shorter again. It was the most poignant, absolutely clear graph that you could possibly imagine. There's no way you could actually even explain that in a class as poignantly as that. It was there, and the farmers looked and said, "May matter." They couldn't believe that this was so blatantly obvious. And how simple is it for you to take a sample of your soil and test it for pH? Not a big deal. So that started a lot of things rolling, and I remember Boerland Coetzee at that time at the farm Kanonkop, and he was advised to put about 5 tons of lime, agricultural lime, into the soil before he planted. He did the deep ploughing. And he said no, he was going to put in 25 tons. And they said, "No, you're crazy, you can't put in 25 tons, that's ridiculous." No, he said, "I'm going to put in 12.5 tons of dolomitic lime and 12.5 tons of calcitic lime. The calcitic lime will break down quickly, and the dolomitic lime will break down when my children will reach 20, because it takes a long time to do that." So it was his farm, do what he wants to. And we ploughed it, and we applied the lime. You want to go back again and look at those vineyards. They are absolutely stunning. And all he did was to look and create a pH environment for his vines to grow in. So those were some experiments and some very, very, they're very poignant examples of what, and how simple, if we just look at the pH. We worry about pouring and, lots and lots of nutrient, but we actually don't take the soil and say, well, let's see, what pH is it? And you can get a pH test kit. These are not difficult, they're not expensive. But if we simply went to the soil and did a pH test, we'd say, oh, okay, this is funny, this is very acidic. Maybe we'll just fix it and bring it back to neutral. You haven't put any pesticide in there, or sorry, any nutrient on it. We've just changed it with lime or whatever to bring it up, and the plant just, away they go. Because nature doesn't do that. Plants will grow where the soil is ideal, and where it isn't ideal, you say, well, why are these trees not growing here? Oh, let's check the soil. And I had some interesting work in the UAE, and our a chap that came up there, he checked the soil, and he could look at leaves and he'd tell us straight away, well, this plant is lacking substance in the soil. And we take the soil samples away to the laboratory, and blow me down, exactly what he said was what was missing. Things like boron. There was not sufficient boron in the soil. We know that soils are broken into 3 different components. You have your sandy soils, so you have your loams, and you have your clays. And here, of course, we have predominantly sandy soils, as you know, in the Cape. So the farmers on the Cape are pouring nutrient into this basic filter. It's just like sand. So there is this issue of re-examining how we're doing. It's too easy to just go down to the Kaap or whatever, go and buy some fertilizer and put it on there and say, well, there we are, it's done. That has to change. We have to start to minimize and look at growing extensively rather than intensively. Let's look around and see what is happening over there. Why is it being done like that? And rather say, hang on a minute, perhaps if I change, I'll just change a little bit of my farm first and see what happens. And if it works out, then that's the beginning of the change.
There were some other stories which we actually talked about last week in terms of the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef. And then lastly, they did an experiment on how the reef responds to an increase in acidity, so ocean level. It protects itself. So what it does is they have like a trial run, okay? So the reef will basically send information to the top part of the reef saying, prepare for heat. and then they prepare for the heat. And it takes quite a bit of energy. And if you think about it, it's kind of weird. It's an entire living organism that's basically telling the top part of that organism to prepare for an increased heat. And so this is actually happens in normal reefs, and it's in this way that reefs are able to survive variations in climate. The problem is, and this is why they figured out why the bleaching is there, is because the reef is sending the signal. It's sending the signal to the top part of the reef saying, listen, there's a problem here, and prepare for it. That it has survived for thousands, perhaps millions of years, and we, in the short space of just 20 years, are destroying it. 20 years. Now the scary part for me, and I'm going to round this up quickly, but the scary part for me is this, is that we already know that if tomorrow, let's say for argument's sake tomorrow, everybody decided, well, look, I'm not driving, all carbon dioxide emitting places said, look, we're going to cut carbon. We already know that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will impact the atmosphere for at least 10 to 15 years before there is any significant drop in global part per million counts of carbon. It'll take them years before they even start to get the idea into their head to stop screwing up the environment. But the fact is it's not. And more than likely, in my opinion, I'm a very logical person, there is an extreme probability that unless there are some unknown kind of
renewable energy laws and legislation, in which we have stated clearly that developing renewable energy and new energy will be our priorities.
在本世纪头10年，中国在可再生能源发展上已经走得比较快。
In the first decade of this century, China have achieved a lot in developing renewable energy and new energy.
我在昨天介绍中国能源发展的情况上已经讲了，中国的风电已经位居世界第2。
Yesterday, in my keynote speech, I have stated that the installed capacity of wind power in China ranked #1 in the world.
水电呢位居世界第1。
And the installed capacity of hydropower ranks #1 in the world.
太阳能光伏电池的这个产量已经达到这个世界的50%。
And we have half of the solar batteries around the world.
中国太阳能光伏发电的能力已经达到60万千瓦。
And the installed capacity of solar PV is about 600 megawatt.
今年到年底，我们有可能达到80万千瓦。
By the end of this year, we expect the installed capacity to increase to 800 megawatt.
太阳能热水器的利用面积，我们已经占到全世界总量的50%，也是世界第1。
And for solar water heater, we have the coverage of about half of the world coverage, ranks #1 around the world.
第3点，我们还要在解决好安全的前提下，要积极的发展核电。
Thirdly, we will actively develop a nuclear power plant on the prerequisite of safety.
中国目前在建的核电的规模有3097万千瓦。
Currently, the nuclear power units under construction is 30.97 gigawatt.
那么这个建设规模也是世界第1。
And for the scale of construction, it also ranks #1 around the world.
在日本福岛核事故之后，中国对建成的核电站进行了安全的评估，对在建的核电站也进行了安全的评估。
After Fukushima accident, the Chinese government has carried out safety evaluation about all the nuclear power units under construction, and we also carry out an investigation on all the nuclear power units in operation.
我想你们也可能知道，中国在核电发展上在积极的和美国、和法国、和俄罗斯、和世界上核电最先进的国家进行国际合作。
And as we all know, China is actively carrying out international cooperation concerning the construction of nuclear power units with the United States, France, and Russia, with this kind of most advanced nations in nuclear field.
我们一定要用最先进的核电技术解决核电的安全问题。
And we are supposed to solve the problem of safety with the most advanced and most safe technologies.
同时呢，你也可能知道中国的这个能源结构以煤为主，我们的煤炭、煤电占到这个发电装机的70%左右。
And in China, we have to confess that the energy mix is still coal-based, and coal-fired power plants constitute about 70% of all the power units in China.
所以中国的这个能源结构与世界的能源结构是不一样的。
Therefore, the energy mix in China is opposite with the average energy mix in the world.
世界的能源结构当中，石油、天然气占到70%左右。
In the average energy mix, oil and gas constitute about 70% of all the energy consumption.
由于中国的这种能源资源和能源结构，就决定中国今后仍然要发展火电。
Considering the current or the status quo in the energy mix in China, which is coal-based primarily, it decides that in the next phase, China will still develop its energy on the basis of coal-fired power plants.
但是我们在发展火电方面已经采取了很多积极有效的技术措施、管理措施、政策措施，促进火电厂清洁高效发展。
In the utilization of coal-fired power plants, the Chinese government has carried out a lot of active and very effective technological management and also policy measures in order to develop the coal-fired power plants in a cleaner way.
第一点，我们在2005年到2010年期间，已经通过上大压小的政策，关闭7000多万千瓦的小火电机组。
From the year 2005 to 2010, we have carried out supporting the large-scale coal-fired power plants and closing down small coal-fired power plants strategy, which have retired about 76 gigawatts of small coal-fired power plants.
这种行动在世界各国都是前所未有的。
And I think this kind of activities is unprecedented around the world.
第二呢，我们通过这种上大压小，使我们国家的大机组的比重，特别是30万、60万，甚至80万、100万的火电机组，占到整个火电装机的80%左右。
Through this kind of activities and the strategic measures, we have also optimized the structure of coal-fired power plants in China. Currently, large-scale coal-fired power units, which has the installed capacity of 300 megawatt, 600 megawatt, and 800 megawatt, even 1 gigawatt has constituted about 80% of all the coal-fired power plants.
第三点，通过这种措施，我们火电厂的供电煤耗下降了20多克。现在中国全国火电厂供电煤耗达到330克千瓦时，也是接近世界先进水平。
Through this kind of effective measures, we also optimize the cost of coal in coal-fired power units. Currently, the coal consumption for per kilowatt hour of power is about 333 grams, which has been reduced by 37 grams through the 5-year plan. Currently, I think the status quo for coal-fired power plants in the respect of coal consumption is pretty advanced around the world.
第四点，我们已经要求中国的新建的火电厂都要加装脱硫、脱硝、脱氮的这种技术措施。
Fourthly, we have asked all the new rising coal-fired power plants to add desulfurization devices in their construction.
同时，对老电厂进行脱硫、脱硝、脱氮的技术改造。
And at the same time, we'll also carry out desulfurization reform and upgrade for old coal-fired power plants.
那么在电价政策上，对于这些清洁环保的措施， 给予一定的鼓励或支持。
As for the tariff policy, we also support the construction of cleaner and more effective coal-fired power plants.
我们欢迎世界各国的专家、能源组织到中国去参观中国的火电厂。
We welcome experts and organizations from around the world to pay visit to China's coal-fired power units.
我认为中国的火电厂在世界上来看，从管理、技术到清洁、环保，还有这个火电厂这个周围的环境，都已经是非常好的。
We believe that the coal-fired power plants in China is pretty advanced in no matter in the respect of technology and also environmental friendly and also more clean and management.
我们火电厂实行零排放。
For coal-fired power plants, we encourage the operators to carry out a zero emission strategy.
有很多火电厂就像花园工厂一样，
Some of the coal-fired power plants are like gardens.
而且我们呢在发展火电的同时呢，还大力发展热电厂。
When we are constructing coal-fired power units, we also encourage them to carry out cogeneration
发展天然气电厂，
and also gas-fired power plants
发展煤层气电厂，
and utilization of coal-bed methane.
还有在要求一些大型的钢铁化工企业实行压擦余热发电。
And we also encourage the steel companies and chemical companies to utilize their redundant heat.
所以中国在优化火电方面做了很多大量的工作。
To sum up, China have achieved a lot and made painstaking efforts in optimizing the structure of coal-fired power plants.
在“12·5”能源规划当中，我们也要求火电厂要采取更加积极有效的措施，发展高效、先进、清洁的火电机组。
In the 12th five-year plan, we still encourage those operators to develop high-efficient, more advanced, and much cleaner coal-fired power units.
在这里，我还要向你传递一个信息：中国30万、60万以上的火电机组的技术指标、经济指标，在世界上都是比较先进的。
Hereby, I would also like to share this information with you that currently the status quo or the conditions and levels and criteria for 300 megawatt, 600 megawatt coal-fired power plants are performing pretty well around the world.
我们火电设备的价格性能比，在国际上都是有很强的竞争力。
And they are also cost-effective in the international market.
2010年，我们向世界各国出口火电设备1800万千瓦。
In the year 2010, we have exported the installed capacity of more than 10 gigawatt.
2011年，仍然有很多国家订购了中国的火电设备。
Hopefully, in the year 2011, we will welcome more purchase from the international market.
所以，请你放心，中国今后的火电厂会越来越干净、越来越清洁、越来越美丽。
So I can say confidently that in the next phase, China's coal-fired power plants will be much cleaner and much beautiful.
所以，欢迎你到中国参观中国的火电厂。
So I would also like to invite experts and organizations from around the world to pay a visit to China's coal-fired power plants to see with your own eyes.
这是我回答你的第一个问题。
That's my answer to your first question.
Human settlement versus conservation land, and how we actually assist people like this. I think the biggest pressure of all is people that are struggling to survive. No, it's a bigger pressure now because
We're advancing numbers.
yeah, and that's a bigger pressure now because the haves and the have-nots, and the more more have-nots we have to support the haves, the bigger the pressure. And here's the situation, because the haves decide, they try and dictate how the have-nots should live. This is part of the big problem that we have in the peninsula here. But let's have a look at Red Hill. It's a really sweet little settlement. It's still relatively contained, and everything around it is a national park, so it's quite relevant in terms of Cape Town, this Cape Town situation. It's a beautiful. We're here at Red Hill. It's, as you see, it's an informal settlement, but what it does represent is it represents some of the pressures that people face, and as a result of that, the environment has to deal with. I've been involved in experiential nature and cultural based travel in Southern and East Africa for the last 25 years. And my true passion is looking at ways to assist conservation and make people aware of some of the real big issues that are facing Africa and some of the most sensitive areas. Quite a number of people live in quite stressful environments. I mean, this is actually far better than many others. Quite a few of the really significant wetlands within the peninsula are affected by this type of settlement, which is unstructured and unplanned settlement. Yeah, so just a couple of pointers in a situation like this. We have a little forest of stone pine trees. It used to be a much larger forest, but the authorities decided that they needed to chop them down, which is very unfortunate because, stone pines are not that invasive, and they also created quite a nice shelter for this settlement here. So the authorities came along and really unnecessarily chopped down these trees. Other problems in an area like this is that service delivery is a big issue. The council doesn't effectively help with waste removal. They also rely on energy to power their cookers, and you notice quite a few people have got their television sets. But when it comes to winters, it gets extremely cold here, so they rely on firewood, and by destroying all the potential firewood in the area, it puts an extra pressure on some of the other plants in the area. A good example of that, a local example, is the baboons.
Yeah.
Is that there are very few left here. We've only got 10 troops remaining on the peninsula, but even the baboons struggle to survive with what's here. So they've kind of adapted their lifestyle to raiding houses now. So this is a lovely example of an absolute climax version of fynbos. What you see is all the leucodendrons. The proteas are the most dominant of the group of plants. This is an example of a leucodendron, male and female. They've got separate plants, male and female, whereas other proteas are all male and female on the same plant. This is an area that hasn't burnt for probably about 20 years, and this is like in this area, this would be the climax fynbos situation. down here in the southwestern Cape, we have the most diverse vegetation type in all the world. It's incredibly rich in biodiversity. An area like this is just one example of the beauty that this vegetation type is comprised of. Probably factors that influence this biodiversity and this extreme wealth of flowers is the fact that for quite a bit of the world's existence, and during the times of the ice ages, this place was relatively ice-free. So in other parts of the world that were locked up in ice, other plants were not able to actually grow and evolve, whereas the Cape was ice-free for longer periods, and they had that edge to develop and basically colonize all this new ground. The Cape itself, this part has been around 120 million years, kind of as a result of the split of Gondwanaland and all the mountains that got raised out of the ocean from one tectonic plate bumping into the other, forming this incredible new piece of earth, which is made up of all these old sedimentary ocean layers. And in this habitat, plants have evolved and diversified, growing on the soils that formed from this Table Mountain sandstone, which is this original sedimentary rock, and also other areas where the Cape granites, which go back even further, 600 million years, have also intruded and formed very acidic soils. So in this area we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have more plants per area than anywhere else, and in this reserve specifically we have more plants than the whole of the United Kingdom put together. But when you look at fynbos, it's it doesn't look like very much if you do a scan over an area like this. But once you get down on your knees and you start examining the actual detail and seeing the different types of plants, you realize how much we've got here. Some of these plants are so specific that the entire world distribution is like within an acre. It's their factors of wind, sun, soil type, and all of those factors together contribute to the ideal growing environment for that plant. And if it doesn't find that anywhere else, so that's why you often find what we call endemic plants that are limited to an area, that they're not found elsewhere. And there's a high level of endemism in the Cape. So, too much development has a big impact on these rare plant species. This is a nice example of pristine fynbos. It's an area that hasn't been burned for quite a long while, but still viable, so it will survive. The situation like this where fire comes through and sweeps clean is not always negative. There's it makes way for new life. Nature has an incredible way of regenerating. Everything can be destroyed, and slowly but surely little seeds, especially of these pioneer plants, establish themselves and then begin a whole new process of life, mainly as anchors to support other plants that become more dominant climax plants later. And I guess if one looks at life and looks at the success of humans, that does repeat itself in history. That you have these great empires that actually rise and then something causes them to crash. Be it war, be it environmental factors, disease, quite a few things. But life has this thing. It has this renewable energy. It comes from somewhere, and the problem is that us humans build this kind of, get ourselves to this apex point where we are in control of our world, in control of everything, and it's actually a very fragile position to be in, because there's the cycle where nature has this way of building and destroying, and our civilization have these towers of grandeur and put too much attention on that value, artificial value system, because it's fragile, as fragile as this environment. But the most beautiful thing of it all is it regenerates. And it's quite significant where we are here now, because when we look at the evolution of man, let's go to venture into a bit of that. Yeah, it's incredible to see how, it looked very, very bleak a while ago, but it doesn't take long. With a bit of rain and a bit of time, everything grows back. And you come back here in a month's time, you're going to have such a spectacular flower show. Into this wonderful formation of land right at the tip of Africa here. We've got a place which is very unique, and I'll go into the detail of the plants later, but this is a situation where we have a dramatic coastline, with these mountains and seascape, and a little bay like False Bay is also once again a very fragile system. It's an incredible biodiversity of animals that exist in extreme conditions. During the summer months we have winds that blow into this bay here, bringing in warm water, and over the winter months the wind blows in the opposite direction and blows all the warm water out of the bay, and we get pockets of what we call upwelling, where the surface water is blown away and then the deep nutrient rich water comes up from below and replenishes that displaced water, and that brings with it the foundation of life for the ocean, which is all these organisms that have been dormant on the ocean floor. And as they get brought to the surface, where you have this, you see the rings of white along the edge of all this, the coastline is that you're seeing there is actually a plankton bloom. That those organisms are brought into the oxygen-rich water, and they suddenly burst into life. And that's the pyramid of the lower part of the pyramid of life that supports this incredible fish reserve and marine biodiversity. So that would what we refer to as the plant version, the phytoplankton, the plant plankton. And then as that food drifts out into this area here, which is mainly the coastline is really made up of pretty cool water. The average temperature is about 12 degrees. So it ranges from really, really cold sometimes to even below 10 degrees. And then it can rise up to about 20 degrees depending on the wind. But this area supports an incredible pelagic reserve of fish. And this plant plankton then eventually gets fed on by the zooplankton, which are the jellyfish and the floating component of plankton, and a bit of krill and all that. And then the other group of fish which live off that, mainly filter feeding fish and anchovies and sardines and mackerel and all that, are then the next level. Great schools and concentrations of that exist off the Cape. Very, very fragile, what they call baitfish reserves. And that would then support the incredible game fish that seasonally exist off the coast here. So the problem is that it's all good and well that nature's supporting itself in a great balance until somebody comes along with a huge net and just trawls that entire pelagic shoal away. And the Cape is very vulnerable in that way. It's quite accessible to fishing vessels. I mean, there's good harbours and good technology, and very soon a fleet of trawlers could discover a shoal of fish. They use all sorts of methods of locating them these days. They use satellite technology. They're able to use they've got various sonars that aren't just like that don't just scan the ocean floor below the boat, they're able to use horizontal sonars where they're actually able to extend the range of the sonars way beyond the old traditional methods, so they can locate shoals of fish from far away and very strategically bring in a whole team of trawlers and actually take everything. So it is a big issue for us. It is one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. In terms of biodiversity, the South African coastline, which is 3,000 kilometers long, represents the second largest diversity of families of fish in the world. So from the very warm tropical coastline up in on the border of Mozambique, all the way to the really cold and rugged coastline of the border of Namibia. So it's a huge range. And within that range, you've got the pelagic fish, which are the ones that very much occur off this coastline, which live in the cold water, which is the Benguela current. And then on the east coast, we've got fish that are reef fish. So they're a bit more vulnerable in terms of exploitation, because they don't easily regenerate themselves. Because once a reef has been destroyed, it's very hard to kind of build the viability of that reef back again. But a place like False Bay, as I said, it's a place where we've got enormous number of fish that are able to withstand that range of temperatures, that are also very localized, as it's some of the fish up on the tropical areas. And within this bay, we've got quite a number of fish that are endemic only to this area, mainly amongst what we refer to them as the little sand sharks, the smaller reef sharks. False Bay is unfortunately quite protected. They don't allow any trawling in the bay here, and the type of fishermen that operate in the area are mainly the traditional fishermen from Cork Bay, who are line fishermen, and a couple of sports anglers. But there are still, in the bay, there are a number of areas which are regarded as breeding sites for cob and for steenbras, and those areas are unfortunately still permit dragnet fishing. So quite often fish that come in to spawn and breed happen to fall within the range of these gill net or land-based net fishermen, and they actually trawl the whole group in and destroy that viable breeding population. But so False Bay is a spectacular area. Good part of it is fortunately protected, and this time of the year we have an incredible gathering of whales, mainly southern right whales, that congregate in these waters.
Impact of on the ground, on the bottom floor of trawlers.
Well, trawlers don't really operate here, but on the other side of this reserve is an area which we refer to as the canyon area, where the water is particularly deeper than here. And it's the kind of interface where you have the cold water and the warm water mixing, because although we have this cold Benguela current pushing up coming down the coast, pushing up the coast from the subantarctic, we have a countercurrent that comes from the other side, and that countercurrent is usually warm water, and that's where all the predatory fish live. And then you have the bait fish within the colder water. Now that's an area that the trawlers target, because it supports quite a biodiversity of fish, mainly the hake and kingklip. The problem with the trawler is non-specific. They basically create this huge wall of net, and they just trawl everything within range of that. And it takes everything. There's a huge amount of bycatch. It doesn't quite scrape. Bycatch is non-target fish. It could be fish. It could be mammals. It could be dolphins. It could be anything that happens to be in the path of that net is taken. And those nets trawl for 3 hours and once they pull it out, everything, the contents of that net gets dropped into a hold, and then it gets processed. So in the time of being trawled for 3 hours and then being thrown out of the water into this big cargo hold and then being processed, most of the animals don't survive. So what would happen then is the fishing company would just take out the viable fish, and the rest would just be thrown out the back. There are quite a few other techniques of fishing beyond, other than the trawling, is the long lining. And the long lining is a matter of having a long rope with multiple lines with hooks which are baited, and it's also quite non-target because they might be looking to catch what they call the normal lionfish by baiting for kingklip and for hake, but they catch quite a number of sharks in the process as well, and those fish don't survive. The other problem with that is the number of seabirds that actually attracted to this fishing operation. So you got shearwaters and all the incredible flocks of pelagic birds out there that actually follow these fishing vessels, and quite a few of them get dive as the ropes are recovered. The long liners, with each rope with its whole series of hooks, and the quite often albatrosses that actually get impaled on the hooks and brought out. So we lose a lot of albatrosses in the process of that. So talking about bycatch, these animals all suffer as a consequence of this fishing operation.
Some people would say that the effect of dropping so much dead fish that is just not the one that they wanted over the edge could mean a lot of food for other fish. Is this indeed what happens?
It is. It's one of the most. I mean, it's quite a significant thing to be around a boat that's pulling a net or lifting a long line, because it does attract everything. I mean, it's for a fisherman. If you're a tuna fisherman, it's probably one of the best places to catch a fish, because the predatory fish know this. They're conditioned already to know that when a trawler lifts a net, that there's going to be a reward or two. So do the birds. So that's true, but the thing is that there's just so much they can eat, and the rest is just pure wastage. It's just a loss of unnecessary life. Man is polluting quite a few of these coastal areas with the sewage situations, and quite a few of the rivers in Cape Town that have been previously quite polluted have also had quite an effect on the estuaries and the coastline. But I think the bigger problem in the rock lobster industry is that they're using a very, very the method of catching lobsters utilizes what they call a trap, which is a huge basket-like box, which has got two funnels on either side. And the problem is that these fishermen often put these traps out on very, very bad weather days, because they're forced they have a pressure to catch a certain number of quota within a certain time frame. So they do expose themselves to some extreme conditions, and in the process lose these nets. And once this net is lost, it continues for almost infinity until that net actually disintegrates, continually catching everything through that funnel system. So they might have started out and had a trap full of crayfish, but those crayfish rot and attract other crayfish. So there's more destruction by them losing one of those nets than probably by them just fulfilling their quota. And if you go onto the western side of the peninsula, you'll just see beaches littered with those traps. I mean, I count up to about 30, 40 at the moment in the reserve. And just try and think back of when they might have lost that, and what a process of killing that net has gone through until it eventually found its way onto the beach. They should prevent operators from using those.
Man is impacting the planet everywhere, and one of the big problems that is happening is potentially with global warming. They're anticipating a man-made man-induced heating of the planet and thus rising the sea levels because of the melting ice. What impact would that have, in your opinion, on, I mean, can you sort of foresee how it might unwind at the process? Up goes the sea level, let's say, give it 2 meters. How will that change things for anybody, for anything?
Well,
Good or
if
bad?
you're talking about the marine environment,
Mostly, but and coastal.
well, I think it will certainly impact on man, because man is really, wherever possible, try to develop their best position along the coast, you know, in terms of valuable, highly sought after residential asset. So I think man has probably ventured a little bit too far in terms of nature's boundaries, and I think that is just a bit of an oversight, because the environment is constantly going through change, and you know, the earth has its cycles, and the cycles have existed forever. In a place like False Bay, for quite a bit of its existence, it was actually dry land. It's not a very deep bay, and at some part of it was a dunescape. So every 30 to 40,000 years we've had this process of sea level rise and fall. It's a dynamic process. Our kind of history is quite limited in terms of timescale, as opposed to what the Earth's timescale is. But for me personally, I think it's more man's impact on
It's a little bit different now
really
because-
physical things, tangible things, and it has been.
Has it?
Yeah.
Completely icebound, like a snowball.
Not completely locked up, and that's why the Cape is rather different from other areas, and that's why we have such a diverse vegetation type, because some parts of the world are relatively ice-free, even during that great chill. There are two schools. You obviously got the scientists that have their, you know, we live in a society where everything is about finding a mechanism of survival, and even scientists have to find a mechanism of survival. And if they can come up with a good theory to support their situation as a scientist, then they're sustaining themselves. And if that theory is to promote the idea that we're going through a time of stress, that global warming is a major impact, then it does create a bit of a public hype, and it does get people on board to help them support their research, because it becomes then a sustainable opportunity for that scientist. And there are two schools. That somebody might have a different theory, and whoever puts the right theory together, because there are many explanations for these environmental effects. One can actually put it down to much more than just pure global warming. And it also depends on, like, you know, how people are lobbied, and how the political support kind of rallies around certain issues, and the way that they can get people on board to achieve their end. You know, there's a great amount of support for anything where one raises the level of fear amongst people. When their security is compromised, if their well-being is stressed, they will always find mechanisms to try and discount their stress situation on something, which is most often bigger issues like environment. And I think the environmental issues that they put out there, and the doom and gloom that they present, are sometimes a bit of a smokescreen for other things that are going down.
And yet, previous civilizations have become extinct, we've basically gone down.
Well, I think a lot of that is human dynamics. Those extinctions would probably be effect of maybe a localized environmental factor, an extended drought, or a local flood, and I mean, those situations have existed in the past. It's not that the world hasn't had catastrophic environmental conditions. I mean, they have happened. We do have volcanoes erupting, having a huge effect on a much greater area than just the local one. I think it's more how man influences his local environment, and how they can try and keep a status quo of balancing nature and balancing human needs.
project would work, where they would come and negotiate because they'd have an agenda. They want to come in here and they want to start a AIDS orphanage or something like that. They would go to the chief and they'd say to the chief, we want to start up an AIDS orphanage and we want to try and employ some people and educate some people and we want to take care of all your AIDS orphans and for that we want some land. And the chief would think about it seriously and he would feel important and say, yes, it's a good idea, we need these things. And there would be this trade-off. But in a way, the project would then be beheld to the chief. Whereas we kind of came through the back door here. Firstly, because I came in here with a preconceived idea that this whole tribal system or traditional system was flawed anyway, and it failed. So I came in here with kind of really a judgment against this whole traditional system and things like that, you know, from what I'd heard, which is really unfair, but that's how I came in here. I sort of touched a little bit on what Contra Lesser, which is the concrete traditional leaders, was all about, and it looked dodgy. In a sense, it was quite rude. I should have gone to the great place of this specific council and said, I'm here to do this. Another thing was, having worked in the Transkei before, worked in many other countries in Africa as well, is that you sort of also believe in the bush telegraph. And I sort of thought, well, what I'm doing, if it's important enough, then somebody will hear about it and they'll come and find me and say, let's meet, sort of thing, which didn't happen. So either the bush telephone didn't get there or I just haven't been doing enough important stuff, really, at that level. So what that did for the project anyway was, I think, was quite beneficial in that journey of understanding what these problems are all about, because we didn't have to work to anybody's agenda or had to deliver anything to anybody. While I was busy, not sure what I was really doing, just building this island in the middle of this place that I wasn't familiar with, having never been as close to the coast. I'd worked up in Ngcobo and places like that several years before. To put in a relatively self-sustainable place and hoping that people would just be flocked and would just feel there's some kind of magnetic pull to this place and we could teach people how to eat and to respect water and soil and building and things like that and get their houses stronger, which was really naive of me, I think, in hindsight. I think people are used to being herded in a way, and they just didn't, so they thought in order to engage with me they'd have to pay me. In other words, if they want to come and make bricks, they'd have to pay me to do that, which was never in my mind, but I didn't articulate that very well, I think. So all this time I'm busy developing these gardens, I'm busy building these buildings, and sorting out these water issues and things like that. And at the same time, I'm watching it collapse around me on the greater scale, the municipality falling to pieces, the water systems falling to pieces, understanding how that's affected the whole dynamics of the community. Because I'm living inside this place and I'm seeing, and I've done this before in other places in other parts of Africa, but never with such a social dysfunctionality, which is what we've got here. So watching people's buildings fall, and not jumping in these things and trying to save everybody, but just saying, well, tough. You know, you don't, until you decide to integrate, it's what's going to happen. Of course, because what then, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but this main chief who was head of Contra Lesser, who I was working with, died and left this huge void suddenly that we had started, which was about leadership. And he completely saw things the way that I saw things, of understanding that present leadership was flawed and had to be nurtured, and then to start focusing on the next leadership, the children, and to create leadership schools for these guys to come through so we can start to shift the whole thing around. Everything is based on oil.
Yeah.
Our monetary system, our judicial system, our education systems, everything on this table. Well, this is now second generation, so that's now no longer oil required. But that's our existence. Oil comes crash. I mean, we see it. I mean, yesterday, I mean, the Dow Jones fell another 3.5% yesterday. You know, you look across the board, the American markets, it's just red. They just crashed. Oil organizations went down 4 to 5%. They're just coming crashing down, and it's happening every day. They're totally overinflated because they're based on where they think the oil reserves are, not where the royal, because everybody's overselling their oil. They're saying, oh no, we've got loads of it still, because they don't want to create panic. We're into these long wars now. I mean, when you've got a country like America that's a net importer of oil, when they produce, I think about 2 to 3, not even 2% probably anymore, of the world's oil. But they use 25% of the world's oil. I mean, they have to control the world. The economy is based on it. They have to control the world's oil, which means they have to be in war. So that's what's going to go on. I mean, it's not going to stop. The only thing that's going to stop it, when there's no more oil to put in the ship, the HSS Indomitable or whatever it's called, to get it across the ocean anymore, that's when it's all going to come grinding to a halt. So we go back to this governance you're talking about. It's all based on central control. But what happens when that central control is broken? The most recent example of that happening was when Katrina went into New Orleans. And it cut off, in the first world country, okay, it cut off Washington, D.C. And within hours, people turned on people. Shops were pillaged. Next thing, people just turned on people. Okay, and that's what happens when there's chaos, when there's no more control, there's no one. So now, in a third world or developing country, when suddenly that power line is cut, it's going to be mayhem. Unless we can shift it, and we can get people and communities, let's call them transition, whatever we want to call them, all these words have been banning around, where they are taking care of themselves. Where they're not reliant upon the central system of control, which is money. And so there's something that's gone. You see, in our conditioning, and we are so conditioned, we have become codependent, where we depend upon each other. And this is really it's a disease. If we use which I do often, I use an analogy of a forest. And we see these forests where they're codependent, where the trees cross over each other and they stop the flow of air through each other, and they stop the growth. And we've seen it here. There's so much evasive stuff comes in. But if you look at a forest that each tree stands strong on its own, and then as a collective, it's incredibly strong. It's a strong, healthy environment. And it's a three-dimensional living thing then. And if we can create that where people can stand strong on their own as individuals, and then as a community, they're really, really strong. And they do things out of free will. Then we can shift the consciousness. But that goes against the religious beliefs, because that's all about codependency. I mean, goodness, it's so disempowering. It's very, there's this fellow who died for my sins. For goodness sakes, I'll die for my own sins. It's very disempowering, and that's where it starts. And it's been so successful. It's indoctrinated in this. In these areas that I am in. This religion that's used here now, several versions of Christianity that are all over these areas that I'm in here. Unbelievable, the fear and the obsession with death and the amount of resources that get put into death and this dignity in death. But where's the dignity in life? And that's what we need to be focusing on. Is that every moment that we have this gift of living, and let's make it count. Let's be authentic. But we're all put our belief in old mutual and funeral schemes for our death, so we can be remembered. But these guys who have they throw these huge parties. They spent their life beating their wives, abusing their children. But they had this incredible funeral, man. It was huge. You should have seen it. Strong Muti there. No. Disgraceful. Let's put that dignity into life now. And I really do believe that in this religion that existed before we came along with this whole sort of Christianity trip and things like that, was this incredible dynamic relationship between the earth and the people in Africa. They call it Kwamata or something like that. And it's brilliant. It's so naive. It's brilliant. It's got counterbalance. It's just based in love and respect. And if you respect the sun for rising, for setting, you respect the seasons, you show respect to the animal you kill to nurture yourself. you respect your spouse or your kids, or, you know, suddenly here come these guys and saying, oh, hold on, you know, you guys are savages unless you, bow down to this figure here. That's it. You're going to go and die a miserable death in hell and things like it. And how could people come here with anything but love anyway? Because that's all we believe in is love. Okay, so this is how people are building here. People without much means, which is called a wattle and daub. So here you've got your wattle, which is your wooden framework, and then they're packing in the daub, which is the clay, in here. Now, historically, this is a brilliant way to build. I mean, a lot of your Tudor houses in the United Kingdom, which have quite adverse weather, use this system. Okay, and they've lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. This house won't last a year. Okay, and they have to redo it. What I'd like to propose that the way that this has been mixed, the way it's been mixed in, there's not much intention going into this. It shows a victim mentality within the people, because if this clay was worked through properly, in other words, it was kneaded like you knead bread, and they put a bit of some dry grass in it, or some millie husks and things like that into it, it would create a stronger integrity in the bond, and it would last for years and years and years. But this has really just been put together very loosely, and there's not much love goes into this wall, and that's why we're using cements and things like that, because it's practical and it gives it longevity. Now, if you go into some of your sort of Central American, Santa Fe, those sort of areas, for them, which they use the adobe blocks, which is also just sort of sun-dried bricks, clay bricks. For them to come once a year, and the woman would come and they would repair the cracks, because they're also in very adverse dry conditions, where the bricks create wonderful insulation for their homes. It works really nicely for them. But for them, it's part of their cultural heritage. They celebrate the renewal every year, where they would fix up their cracks, they make big clay pits and create a render. That's part of who they are, and their yearly existence, their yearly rebirthing. Yeah, this is clay which we've got locally here. Now, it's quite a strong clay actually, prone to cracking, but it could be worked through a lot better. You fill this with your mix, okay, with a very little bit amount of water, and then you'll put this on it, and you'll push it down, which is your primary compaction. All right. Then take that over, and then this is where you'll notice the bottom is coming up. Yes. So it's compacting from the bottom. There's your compaction. Alright, so it's compacting up. Up it goes, and it pops the brick out, which would be up there now. 2 people could make a brick every 17 seconds. Yeah. But you get machines now that can do 12 bricks at once, doing the same. But the nice thing about it is that, as opposed to the machines that can make 1,500 bricks a day, there's a huge effect on the environment, where you're actually getting, I mean, that's a hungry machine, and where you're getting that material from. Whereas this here, it's more hand. You can use the foundations of your building to build the walls up. It doesn't have to have such a negative effect on the environment. They're not fully set yet, so I don't want to mess with them too much. So it's 240 mils long, and it's 100 high, and it's 140 wide, which from an engineering perspective is perfect for a wall. You can support a roof with this lightweight roof, and it'll be fine. This is going to set for about 3 weeks. This digester, which I designed, it's a closed bag. Well, it's got an inlet and an outlet and a gas outlet. So it's made from reinforced PVC, which is the same material as you'll make a jumping castle from. And it's shaped. The shape of it is like a loaf of bread. It's risen. So it has the convex top on it, and everything else is squared. it fits into this frame here that I just built with brick. And how it works is it comes from the toilets. The waste comes into the I can also feed it with green material, which produces most of. If I really want to get a lot of push my my methane levels up, I'll feed it with some bananas or stuff like that, which boosts it. It comes in here, and inside here I have a live culture, which is anaerobic, which means that it exists without oxygen. Okay. So it's the digestion process is anaerobic as opposed to aerobic, which is like your composting loos and things like this. So the microbes that exist inside here break down the waste very, very efficiently, and the energy that comes out of that is the methane gas. Now, if you can smell, Judy, which it's almost a composty smell. There's not necessarily a sewage smell, but there's a slight composty smell. If you come close down here, you could almost smell the gas as well, which is when you burn it, there's no smell whatsoever. Again, it's a composty one. It's not necessarily unpleasant. We'll fill this with green material, with anything, and we'll just get some water and shove it down. It's a big stomach. That's how it really works. There's enzymes that are breaking down the material inside there. And from that they create methane gas. And they create high nutrient water. Now there have been sort of many household biodigestion systems that are coming out. There are about 6 cubic meters prefabricated systems that cost probably about 40,000 rands. And they're not high gas yielding, but what they are doing is they're breaking down the water, the black water, the effluent water, which is really critical. And so therefore the principles are very much along these lines. This is just a bit more rudimentary. And so from here the water will go through a sand filter, which is what this is, which we've got. Obviously there's high nutrients in here. We've still got about 5 to 7% pathogens, which is your E. coli, etc., coming into here, which then these plant life will take it out. So it'll come into here, it will filtrate down through a slow sand filter. Underneath here, about a meter down, there's a hole, and it'll come up here, which this is full of shells like this, and charcoal, which then absorb the last remnants of pathogens. Okay, that's what this one, and the reeds, of course, as well, take out anything. So it's we really have removed as much. I mean, if there's anything left, it's absolute trace elements. The water will gather in here and settle, and then will slowly gravitate down through our trees and our orchards, which are down that side, which is high nutrient water, which you can drink. It'll give you a bit of a stomach ache because it's high in nutrients, but certainly nothing poisonous. And but it's very good for growth of the trees and plants. We've got coffee trees down there and a loquat tree, and we're definitely seeing pronounced growth as to the other trees that we have around here that are not enjoying these high nutrients that we're getting out of here. So ultimately what you'd like to have is say 3 or 4 houses together, all the waste leading into a digester, which then would lead into an orchard, oranges or whatever, which would then go to provide food for that house, provide the energy for the gas, as well as, most importantly in my mind, is processing the black water and not getting it into the waterways, which is critical. So we've got our dam over there where the water collects. All right, it's about 120,000 litres of water. We've got our fish inside there as well, which is a source of protein. And we feed the garden with that water as well, which then all slopes back into the dam slowly. From there the water is pumped up through to the storage tank, but it goes through a filtration process first, and then we can put in a solar pump to pump it up to it's a 5,000 litre storage tank. The water is then, there's pipes going around down into the kitchen. From the kitchen it's processed through the food. The food is then processed through our bodies, which is then to the toilet, which then comes down through the digester, through the filtration, back into the gardens, and ultimately back into the dam. And it's a closed cycle, which we have now interrupted. We've taken from it, but now we've also put back the byproduct, which has helped our plant life growth, and it's given us energy. We're obviously going through transition now into winter, so we're getting our celeries going, our beetroots, carrots, things like that, lettuces, which this is quite a warm climate, so the lettuces don't always do that well in the hotter climates. We also do have some shade houses here as well to protect them through the summer. And what we're trying to do here is create a food forest where we've got our trees going, we've got bananas trees there, citrus trees going, we've got nut trees, avocado trees, pawpaws, as well as guava and coffee. We've got about 350 coffee trees in this space as well, which has got about another 3 years to go before they start producing. And then we've got climbing beans all over the place, which we're getting a huge amount of food from, plus our loofahs, which we eat when they're still young. And then we've got our pigeon peas as well, plus all our herbs and that. And then we go all the way down where we've got our ground covers. This is what we can call an aerated bed. It's off the ground. We've got green material at the very bottom, which is composting, and then we've got which is a long nutrient release bed, which is like a double dug bed, and then above it we've got layers where we've got decomposing materials at various stages, plus cow manure. That's very rich if you look at that. If we look around here, of course, sod's law, we won't find any, but there's worms everywhere as well that are working away. Perhaps if we look in one of the other ones, and then we cover that all up. Right now, because it's winter, we have quite a bit of dew, and this mulch here is holding that water, because we're in drought now, is holding that water on the ground. Plus the kind of growth here, we've got corianders and cresses, which are low onto the ground, and not using up too much of the precious nutrients. But this is where we have problems, where we have invasive plants like this guavadilla, which just comes on and takes over.
But it does produce fruit that you eat.
It produces fruit, but it stops the oxygen from getting to these plants. So this needs to be managed a bit. In this garden here, we've got not just fruit that's for eating, but it's to attract other insects that eat aphids and things like that, like the marigold, which the scent, some of these invasive pests don't like the smell of, and it attracts other ones which then also eat other pests. So it's a very strong deterrent for an organic garden. There's a certain amount of weeds in here as well. If we look here, these are some weeds growing there. We allow that. We share the garden. We've got nice cloves growing as well, which is really good. On the sides here, we got roots creating networks, holding everything inside here. In this one here, we've got mints, and we've got some gooseberries over there. It smells lovely. If you're into that, and we can also put strawberries in some gardens. At the bottom there, we've got strawberries holding the whole thing together. So we've got garden and garden. Yeah, peanuts here, which are coming good soon. In about 2 weeks' time, we can harvest these. And carrots are coming right as well now. The seeds there, the marigolds are now going to seed, which I'll just distribute. Okay, so this is our dam, which already now we're a month and a half into the dry season, and we're seeing quite a bit of depletion of the water already. But last year we just managed to survive with it, but this year we've got more fish in it, so it's going to be interesting to see. Some of the fish are already at edible size. Just haven't worked out to catch the buggers yet. There's some turtles in here as well, frogs. So it's quite diverse. Turtles take out the small fish to try and keep the population down a bit. You can see that each rice has its own little, each grain of rice. There's a little sheath that exists in. Here's your grain of rice. Our food production has been up about 20 to 30% since we've had the bees here. We were getting some bees still before we put the hive here from the forest, But this is this hive is about 6-7 months old now, and is very, very active. We've already put the second super on the top. So the super is where our honey lives. So the big box at the bottom is the bees' honey, where the queen lives, and then above there is where when that's full, they move up, and that's when we harvest our honey. So the middle one is now full, and the top one is half full now. And what we'll do is, as we go into winter now, the activity will be less and less, and we'll put on one more super, I think, and then we'll harvest the honey probably in the springtime. So now we're not just looking at some kind of one-dimensional garden. We're taking into all different, and we're utilizing all of it, and we're rotating them all the time, and then also protecting them through the winter months. So it's just being conscious, but certainly there's a lot less energy is put into this garden as it develops more and more and more, and nature is allowed to do her thing, which is what's really exciting about it. And it truly, I do believe in about 2 years' time, it will be a food forest. And if we can get more and more of these into these communities, and people can understand them and nurture them, and yes, take, but then also put back and feed, then we can start to create community around these sources of food.
If you cannot prove the economic benefits of your case, it's really difficult to convince the financial department. And one of the ways that we have done it is working together with the London School of Economics with their city program. Stockholm have done that too, and other cities, but also bringing in a report that shows that green economy, in fact, is good business. Is also important for the city council to see that on the table. We have a lot of a good starting point in Copenhagen for that, and that is also important. When you go around in Copenhagen, what you see is not least all our bikers. We are now up 45% of all trips in Copenhagen every day is done by bike. In fact, it's more than 60% of Copenhageners using their bike every day. What you can't see is that we have district heating. Almost 100% of all buildings in Copenhagen is heated by district heating, and 63% is renewable now. So we are also on the way to make that change to 2025, where we have to be 100% renewable. We have also taken the decision, or the city council has taken the decision, to build 100 turbines in Denmark, and we are in the tender process, on the national tender process for the time being in doing that. So that is an important part of the transformation. Electric vehicles, it's difficult to have the same numbers as in Norway, that's for sure, but we're doing it ourselves in our own fleet, also with a more efficient fleet, and have now more than 200 electric vehicles in the fleet, and working to the number of 100%. Climate adaptation, we also have to remember that, because that is important for a lot of cities, also our cities. We have had a lot of severe cloudbursts in Copenhagen over the last 4 years with really high damage, and so that is also, we have just approved, or the city council have just approved 300 projects to implement over the coming years. So a simple plan. What I want to say is that technology is maybe not the difficult part here. We have the technologies more or less. Of course, we have to improve and innovate on that. But what is really difficult is the involvement of stakeholders. We need to work in new ways with the stakeholders, with industry and universities. Otherwise, it will be impossible to solve the climate problem. Just a few figures on development. As I said, 2.8 ton per capita, and a 31% reduction in total in the last 9 years. And we see also a reduction in transport, but a slight increase last year, so we have to follow that the coming years, because that is really one of the challenges in cities. Yeah, so to conclude, I think what we can show in the Nordic cities is that we can have a strong political commitment for this transformation, and that is also a really important message to other cities around in the world. Also that we have good financial basic, and that is one of the issues also here in Paris. We need a financial solutions for cities. Otherwise, the infrastructure will not be the right one for the next 10 years, where a lot of cities will increase rapidly. Broad stakeholder involvement is key, and we have to work with new partnership models, public-private innovation, for example, but also having some common business plans together with, develop that together with business and universities. And finally, and not least, a lot of communication about what we're doing, sharing our knowledge with cities and citizens in what for the implementation of that is really key. Thank you.
Copenhagen and Stockholm are one of the first 10 cities full members of the Compact of Mayors, which of course we are very proud of, and but it's also an example of what we're doing. Stockholm are one of Europe's fastest growing cities in right now. We are growing by about between 15 and 20,000. Half are coming from the hospital, it's newborn babies, and the other half is coming from is immigrants from the Green Party. Is not here, but there is nowadays very little difference between the conservative side and the left-wing side. We have a left-wing majority in the city hall, but we right now, since a year back, that we have had 8 years of a conservative coalition, and basically it's totally different compared to the situation 10 years ago. What we are measuring here is heating, electricity and transport. Of course we are aware about the consumption and the goods, but we have the same conclusion as you. It's almost impossible to measure it, and we don't want to ruin our statistics. We still want to do what we can do in the city, and no matter what will happen in this conference, what happened in Copenhagen 5 years ago, and we still want to do what we can to minimize our carbon dioxide emissions. So we have gone from 5.3 tons in 1990. We are right now down at somewhere 2.8, perhaps 2.6, 2.7, because we have rather warm winters. And the next goal is to be down to 2.3 tons in 2020, and to be a totally fossil fuel-free city. This is more complicated. I know that you want to be a climate neutral city, and the first capital being climate neutral in 2025, but to be a fossil fuel-free city is to have no fossil or carbon dioxide emissions at all. So what we are now planning for, how to get rid of the plastic in the incineration plants, for example, how do we control the car traffic? That is the biggest challenge that we have in Stockholm. And as you can see, we're down at about 2.5 million tons CO2 emissions. We have lowering it in the emissions in the city by a million million tons CO2 emissions since the last 15 years. And the blue line here is heating, and this is electricity, and that is car traffic and transport. And we think that we will be totally fossil-free heating in 2030, somewhere between 2025 and 2030. It's a discussion to perhaps be it already in 2020, but that would be extremely expensive, and we don't control our energy company. For the heating company, it's where half is owned by the Finnish company Fortum, which is owned by the Finnish state, basically. And electricity, we are calculating the Nordic mix here. If you're then Swedish electricity, almost fossil-free. It's half is hydropower, 40% is nuclear power, and the rest is wind, some solar, and some combination of the in the district heating systems. The big challenge is the traffic. How can we ensure that the car driving in Stockholm, and half of all car driving in Stockholm is not Stockholmers, it's they're coming outside from the neighbor municipalities in the region of Stockholm, but how can we control them so they don't use fossil fuels? And that is a challenge. We don't have the legal access to every measurements that we need in action, but that is what we want to do. I use this is the old king, our present king, which is Gustav II Adolf, is the present king's grandpa, and the king will be here tomorrow, I think, but here is inaugurating the combination when we combine the southern metro line with the western metro line. And the interesting thing, we are lucky in Stockholm to have very foreseen politicians. They planned metro stations to places where no one lived because they had the inner vision of the growing city. And the environmental work and the climate work have brought back the long-term perspective. What we are facing in Stockholm as one of the biggest challenge is the sea level rise of the Baltic Sea. Because if the Baltic Sea flood into the big lake Mälaren, we have no fresh water. This is Hammarby waterfront. It's one of the first and most well-known eco-districts in the world. But here was the aim to reduce the environmental impact by 50%. Almost succeeded, but the experiences from here, we took it to the next district that we will reduce the environmental impact by another 50%. Here we have a very tough performance request. We own the land, the city of Stockholm owns the land, and there is a number of private developers, about 25 to 30 developers, who are building up 10,000 new apartments in a new green residential district in the north inner city of Stockholm. In Stockholm, and I think as in Copenhagen and Oslo, we have a green market-driven situation. This is an example where it's not so much of new technology, but it's a new thinking. This building is the head office for two big newspapers in Stockholm, the Svenska Dagbladet and Aftonbladet, and they are it's heated by the heat surplus from the central station that used to be ventilated out. Now it's in use. It's cold from the water outside, and it's an example of that private developers and private construction companies are competing to be the greenest in Stockholm. We also have the district heating. We have the market share is a little bit. We use the water to cool our buildings. And this is also the contributor to the better air quality. Stockholm has 100 times better air quality today than we had 50 years ago when I was a kid in the city of Stockholm. Congestion charges is one of the most well-known infrastructure project in Stockholm. It was introduced in 2006 after huge opposition from the Stockholmers. Now everyone is, it's a consensus. We will increase the price by 75% from the 1st of January 2016, and there is no opposition. Everyone knows it, but it's fully accepted. As a tool, and the traffic level it has been remained reduction compared to 2005, but reasonably 25%, and despite the fact that we now are 100,000 more people in the region and 200,000 more people in the region and 100,000 in the city, and no increase of car traffic. It's a traffic node simply because we don't have the road space anymore, and we are reserving the big roads for public transit and bikers. And we are now having heavily investment program in new metro lines, one up in the north, one to the east, one small extension in the northwest, and a new southern metro line, just to make people to manage the transport. We also try to increase the infrastructure for electrical cars. We think it will explode on the market in the 5 years, but we don't control it by ourselves, but we need to get the price down, and we don't have the same situation as you have in Norway, where an electrical car is about the same price as a normal car. But we have, for 20 years, we have run a clean car project in Stockholm, and Stockholmers want to buy clean cars. So more than 20%, almost 25% is cars that emitted less than the broadband net of Stockholm. The city-owned company called Stokab. That's Europe's biggest fiber net, and that will help us to reduce it. We are now using the technology and ICT development as a tool in the climate combat. And the Stockholmers are behind us. 90% of the Stockholmers think it's very good that we have high ambitions. And people also accept that we put a demand on the household to reduce their CO2 emissions and to adopt a more sustainable lifestyle. And we have tremendous success where we have a cookbook of sustainability, the climate cookbook, which have been a success in Stockholm. So we have already decided to be fossil fuel free 2050. Now it's already in 2040. It will be it's almost finished in the proposal for the city council, but it will be a consultation on that. So somewhere in May, June, we will see the city council decide on the roadmap for 2040. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be here in Paris today, and I'm very glad that I have the opportunity to briefly explain you Helsinki climate roadmap that we recently finalized in Helsinki. In Helsinki we have a target of being carbon neutral by 2050, so a little bit more slowly than Copenhagen and Stockholm. Waste has an almost minimal impact in this respect. Households are the main source of greenhouse emissions. Over 50%. Traffic is number, or services and workplaces is number 2 in this, and we have relatively little industry in Helsinki. Only 10% of the emissions are produced by industry. The city's own services and buildings and public transport is causing only 8% of emissions, which is a relatively small amount. So we have to have an effective impact on the other private citizens, for example. They have to come into this work in order that Helsinki can reduce greenhouse emissions in an effective way. Here are the emissions and scenarios. The red line is emissions in tons per capita, and blue line is the emissions, the total emissions. The difference is due to the relatively rapid increase in inhabitants in Helsinki. We are also growing, as we heard, is the case in Copenhagen and Stockholm. We have got about 100 inhabitants more compared to year 1990. Now we are about 600,000, and if you think about year 2050, we are expecting to have 260,000 inhabitants more in Helsinki, which is about 40% increase in the present figures. we have had about 23% decrease in total emissions compared to year 1990, and almost 40% if you calculate that per capita. So the direction is good, but there is still a lot of work to be done, of course. Last spring we published Helsinki Climate Roadmap. I took a couple of them with me. I don't know where they disappeared, but there was about 50 examples of this. There we try to explain to politicians and also to general public what could each individual do in order to minimize our climate footprint. There are many practical advice, and also we have collected all the things that Helsinki City has been doing during the past years. We found some 800 different projects and different decisions that had an impact on climate change, and we kind of put them together to this climate roadmap. As I mentioned, we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, and emissions from the city area should be diminished by 30% by year 2020, and we have almost reached that target. Also emissions from energy production reduction with 20%, that has already almost been reached. Okay, our vision for 2050 is that we want to have a new climate-friendly modes of business, and we want to have also a green environment that promotes the health and well-being of residents. That's not a very easy task as the city is growing so fast, but I think that our city planning is doing a very good work in this respect. And we want that energy would be produced in a carbon neutral way, and that we would have the world's best energy efficiency. We are also doing quite many projects with rain and meltwater, how to treat them, how they could be used in parks and gardens, and so that they wouldn't go to the wastewater treatment plants. And we are aiming at a dense urban structure, and that of course helps us in generating low transportation emissions in Helsinki. Some ongoing energy saving projects. We have a so-called energy renaissance in suburbs. We have a lot of buildings that have been built in 50s and 60s, and now they are about to need some renovation. And we want to increase the energy efficiency of this building in a significant way. We have also published some let's say, practical guidance how to do it, and also some possibilities how to get finance for this work. Yes, of course we have several advisory services and campaigns in this respect. And what comes to our own buildings, city buildings, we aim at nearly zero energy guidelines. For example, the building of Helsinki Environment Center, in which I work, is now carbon free this year, and it's the most energy efficient building of Finland actually, even it's already 4 years old, and I think that's a pity. I would like that someone would be better, but no one has done that so far. Yes, Helsinki is producing now heat and power in a very efficient way, as it combines production of electricity, production of heat, and also cooling. And this system saves about 40% of fuels compared to normal system. We are increasing slowly the use of renewable energy sources. It's now only 7%, but it's going to be 20 by 2020. Actually, probably tomorrow a very important decision will be made in this respect. The city council will probably decide to close our biggest energy plant, Hanasaari, and that means that use of coal in Helsinki will decrease by 2/3. So a big difference, but decision will be made tomorrow, so I can't be 100% sure if this is the case, but I'm almost 100% sure that this will be the decision. One simple example is Katsivala heating and cooling plant, which is the biggest plant in the world of this kind. It uses the waste energy from the wastewater of Helsinki. It takes the heat out from it, and sometimes during summer, if it's very hot in Helsinki, that can also sometimes happen, that then this can be used vice versa, so that it gives cooling energy to the city. It's about 80% more energy efficient than let's say normal plant would be. We are going to have guidelines for locating wind power in the city area. We had a study that showed that most people want to have more wind power in the city, and that's what is going to happen in Helsinki as well. We try to adapt to increasing rainfall and flooding, and of course the methodologies, requirements and guidance for more energy efficient buildings are being created. We'll try to create a global reference area for smart and clean solutions, and there we have quite a good collaboration between cities, businesses and government. This project was launched in March this year, and now we have already some 80 companies, big companies or universities, research institutes there, and they have done some 150, let's say, agreement on what they are going to do in this respect. And of course, mobility issues, building and water supply, energy efficiency, consumer and clean tech are subject of this kind of picture of every single house of Helsinki, and you can see whether your house is losing energy from rooftop and compare it to your neighbor if you want to. And also the similar exercise was made of the solar potential of the rooftops, that every single person in Helsinki can look how his or her apartment is doing in this respect, whether to put solar panels on the roof or not. Ongoing in mobility, city tolling is a high, let's say, political issue or hot political issue, but I'm sure that we are moving to that direction. We are doing a lot of work concerning the mobility as a service. We want to increase walking and biking. I, for example, bike every day to my work, but it's very far from the Copenhagen figures that it's. I would like to have same situation in Helsinki as well.
Now, with response to the political will, no, I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think since we last met at such an event, I think we have seen an awful lot of sensitisation. And I think the media exposés have put it on the agenda at levels it's not hitherto been. We can only hope that it carries on. I believe that the cooperation which has been shown in some of the famous cases and the recent arrests indicates that it is moving forward much, much quicker than I would have thought it would do.
One of the specific question that I have, and in a way it's a question to the whole audience, is do we have the necessary political will to do something on the criminal issues of this problem. Now, on IUU fishing, there's a lot of political statements through the African Union and different regional organizations, the European Union, probably in ASEAN as well. I would think that they have different statements on IUU, but we are lacking similar statements on these issues, the criminal issues of this problem. So my question is, do we have enough political will and understanding of the problem that we are discussing here to move this forward? Thank you.
We had the possibility at one stage that the funder might land somewhere in Durban or Cape Town. If we had the license provision, we would have been able to arrest immediately and take action in South Africa. Just an example of what the license provision can do. And then the third maybe suggestion, question, if Marcus can maybe quickly react to it. If we bring in a license provision, why is the license provision, why was we limited to saying fish products or wildlife products coming that was harvested in contravention of the laws of another country? Why not say any fish that was harvested in contravention of the laws of another country or in contravention of any international or regional fisheries agreements? Then you make it even wider and more effective.
You know, it may actually do that, and I used a shorthand. There's a whole set of action verbs and nouns in the Lacey Act, and so I went right to the issue of something's harvested, but it's something like harvested, transported, exported, you know, and a whole big set of action verbs, and then the list of underlying laws that you violate include laws and regulations, and it may include U.S. treaties as well. So I believe, for example, CAMLAR would count, but you don't hold me to that.
Another very, very useful thing with the post-state control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities on behalf of a reefer vessel, is that the information about these vessels that have been detained is very easily available on the internet. Each MOU provides you with a list, and so whenever I have some concern about the vessel, I'm thinking, okay, let's check this out. What is the profile of this vessel? And sure enough, there I can find every single port that this vessel has been inspected in, whether there has been any deficiencies reported, within what amount of time has been fixed and so forth. And when you see some of these reefers and they have 13 defects, etc., well, then that tells you something about what kind of company is behind this, what kind of vessel it is. And if we could have that for fishing vessels as well, it would give us really a wealth of information to profile the operators that we are dealing with.
And indeed, it's something that South Africa is actually looking very seriously into. We have even had the Torremolinos Convention, which is actually making sure that the vessels need to have the AIS to ensure that we are able to track these fishing vessels in our coastline. We have a monitoring room that's operating 24 hours at SAMSA, and I think starting from that we can even collaborate with DAF, with their control room, and try to implement it and have those stringent measures in place. And I think once we ratify that convention, we will be even in a better position to regulate those fishing vessels, even those that comes into South Africa.
I firmly believe that if you do have a suspected IUU vessel, you should actually allow it into your port, and then you can apply the full range of your domestic law to that vessel and thorough investigation and inspection of that vessel. If it's got fish on board, you don't necessarily need to allow them to unload the fish, and you can conduct that investigation, and then you come up with a lot of evidence, a lot of information about who beneficial owners are, where the product might be going, or associated persons. Then if you're unhappy with it, leave port. So for those that are looking at port state measures, I'd encourage you to allow them into your ports so that you can then apply the full suite of domestic law Once they're outside of port, once they're on the high seas, we're limited. Once you've got them in your domestic jurisdiction, you've got far more power.
Another very, very useful thing with the post-state control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities on behalf of a reefer vessel, is that the information about these vessels that have been detained is very easily available on the internet. Each MOU provide you with a list, and so whenever I have some concern about the vessel, I'm thinking, okay, let's check this out. What is the profile of this vessel? And sure enough, there I can find every single port that this vessel has been inspected in, whether there has been any deficiencies reported, within what amount of time has been fixed and so forth. And when you see some of these reefers and they have 13 defects, etc., well, then that tells you something about what kind of company is behind this, what kind of vessel it is. Now, if we could have that for fishing vessels as well, it would give us really a wealth of information to profile the operators that we are dealing with.
What would you think of introducing notion of strict liability for certain fisheries crime? We had that in our fisheries law prior to our constitution, and some of that in South Africa at least is possibly unconstitutional, but it could be taken up at international domestic level to work towards strict liability. If you are found at the moment with, say, 5 rock lobster in your possession, it's up to you to prove that they weren't taken illegally.
Where you could take away somebody's boat, you could forfeit their fish, you could ban them from the industry. Because what you're doing is you're putting the onus on them to comply. And so maybe the simplest example of that is a speeding ticket. Nobody really cares whether you knew you were traveling over the speed limit. The rule is you travel over the speed limit, you have to pay the ticket. And the idea is that it puts the onus on you to stay below the speed limit or around there. Criminal law at its very fundamental level deals with blame. It's society blaming an individual for being bad, doing something that was bad. And so at a very, very fundamental level, I think every legal system that's civilized that I'm aware of, you have 2 components, actus reus and mens rea. And the idea is look, if I pull out a gun and I shoot somebody, am I guilty of murder? And the answer is, well, it depends. If I thought I was shooting at a target and somebody happened to be standing behind the target, do we regret that? We absolutely regret that. Am I guilty of intentionally murdering somebody? I'm not. And that's a very important moral principle that I think we have to embrace. And certainly it would be unconstitutional to have strict liability, I think, in the United States. It's probably not a satisfying answer, but it's fundamental to criminal law. You can regulate society in other ways, but if you're going to use criminal law, strict liability is almost never a possibility. It does happen in the United States in very, very rare circumstances, but it would almost certainly be unconstitutional in a situation like Galicia.
Well, I think you've got a good point, because there is a balance between risk and the consequences. Everyone does risk analysis, so do they. But the risks and the costs may be quite low, because the criminalisation of fisheries crime is not equivalent to the level of criminalisation of the risks for say, drugs. And it may be well the case that the value of the vessels is not terribly high, and they may be prepared to write those off as they can buy some other ones quite easily. But it would also may reach a situation where the vessels are forfeit and they're auctioned, and maybe they can buy them back at a cheaper rate and have a vessel which is free of any issues because it's seen as changed owner. But it may be the same entity but with a different corporate role. I mean, that happens in the maritime industry, where we've seen vessels being abandoned with a cruise and the same people have bought them back at auction which means there's no liens against them, and they can carry on and do it again repeatedly. So there is a risk there as well.
I did a bit of research on the Lacey Act, and I wrote, after the Bengas saga, I wrote a long article in the Cape Times suggesting exactly that, because we have wildlife crime generally, as we all know, rhino horn, elephant poaching, and I was hoping it would be taken up, particularly in Vietnam and other Asian countries where our rhino horn, etc. goes. But I got no feedback from a very prominent article in the local media. So I'd like to ask, not on the panel, but I know there's a delegate from at least Indonesia or other Asian delegates, what they see the political hurdles might be to have a Lacey type act in their jurisdictions.
Port state control is really not something that we have been discussing a lot in the fisheries crime context yet. Still, it is such an untapped resource for our ability to conduct routine control and investigations of vessels, now, or around inspections of vessels. And for those of you that perhaps isn't familiar with port state control, because it doesn't really exist in the fisheries context, it might be worthwhile to give 2 words of background to how the system works. So you've got a number of conventions that do not apply to fishing vessels in general, they apply to transport vessels. So your reefers are covered, but not your fishing vessels. Now, countries around the world are in what you call a memorandum of understanding, regional arrangements, where all the ports undertake to inspect a certain percentage of all vessels that come to port. And then they routinely check what are the living and working conditions of the people on board a vessel. Is this vessel seaworthy? Is it safe, etc.? And in the moment they find non-compliance, the vessel is detained and it's being held back until these errors are being, or faults are being amended. Now, what a wonderful tool in our context. The vessels that I climbed on board together with Bernhard Wiedemann the other day, 7 vessels coming here to Cape Town. Now they were fishing vessels, they're not covered by any of the C-188 that John Lidlow was speaking about. It would have been a wonderful tool to assist us in ensuring minimum standard. It's not enforced yet, so we can't use that as a basis. Now, on board these vessels, the working and living conditions were horrendous. These vessels were clearly unsafe and unseaworthy. Now, you can spend a lot of time prosecuting the crimes, but you can bring that vessel out of circulation very easily if it's not maintained to certain standards.
The biggest problem that I see is one that we've talked about on numerous panels, and that's corruption. And it's not just corruption with respect to the bribing the environmental police and et cetera to look the other way. It's also corruption in the judiciary and in the prosecution offices. I'll give you an example. I was able to really build a case against Arnold Benjes in the United States based on mens rea and other things is because I was able to split cooperators. And there's no way of sugarcoating that. What that means is that I arrested people. I said, you are going to face a long prison sentence. Here's roughly what that prison sentence will be. That's par for the course, and you're welcome to go ahead and either go to trial or plead guilty and go to jail. Or you can work with the United States, cooperate, provide truthful testimony in the prosecution or investigation of another person, and you can get a lower sentence. And we were allowed to do that because we have a judicial system that is transparent and that the rule of law matters. Let me flip to something else that happened to me recently. I was in Masai Mara in Kenya, and I was asking one of the wildlife officials there, how many poachers have you arrested in the last year? And he gave me an astonishing answer. He said 40. And I was stunned because if I were prosecuting there, I would have taken each one of those 40 and I would have flipped them, and that would have turned into 2 more arrests and then 4 more arrests, and we would have had easily 200 people arrested and worked our way up the chain. That's how you do a prosecution here. That's how you do it in the United States. I said, what happened to those 40? And the guy said, I have no idea. All right. And you need to fix the corruption in all of the countries in the world, and that's what will ultimately strengthen us.
Good day, we're here at Monkey Valley Resort at Crown Eagle, overlooking Long Beach. We're going to cook some beef fillet today. It's free range fillet, it's organic. It's not fed the normal stuff that you get from these battery sort of animals, that is fed grain that is made from that has been affected, and it leaves a sort of footprint on the planet, and it's not really good for you. It's also known that in future we're going to start running out of proteins and natural food, so we must start looking at ways for our own well-being and for other generations to come to utilize food that is natural and less protein. This meat that we're going to cook today, we're only going to use like 8% protein of the whole meal, and the rest is all going to be carbohydrates or vegetables in this case. So we're going to start by roasting off some pepper, red pepper, lots of color. It's known to lower your blood sugar or your cholesterol. Very good for you. It's got a lot of color. It's tasty. They say that if you eat red pepper in the morning with your egg whites, it's good for keeping the hunger at bay. So we're going to start off by roasting this in the pan slowly. Just going to add a little bit of butter, pure butter, also very good for you in small amounts. And then I got the beef fillet here. I'm just going to cut a small section of it. That's all we're going to need for this dish. And then we got some aubergine here, also known as brinjal or eggplant. That's going to go into the pan with the red pepper there. And then I got some baby marrow here, also known as courgettes or zucchini in America. Nice green color, which has got a lot of fiber, which is good for you. Helps with the digestion. So we're all just going to put it all in the pan and just let it cook slowly on a low heat there till it's ready, while we prep the rest of the ingredients. So I got a little bit of broccoli here. So once again, nice green color, lots of fiber. And I'm not adding any water or anything here. I'm just relying purely on the low heat and the natural water that's in the vegetables to slowly sort of cook it down. I'm going to take another pan. You can put a lid on this, but I'm going to take another pan and just let it cook in there slowly. So you're creating like a little, almost like a little pot, steam pot, closed pot there, that's going to cook itself. Because it's closed, the steam will drop back into the pan, so it will ensure that the vegetables doesn't burn. So by the time your vegetables is cooked, it will have a nice color. Then I'm going to take a little bit of cherry tomatoes. So I'm going to turn this to this side because it's colder there. I need to heat here. In the meantime, while we wait, we can have a sip of red wine. A little bit more butter. And then we're going to finish it off with some red wine. Then last but not least, fresh lemon. I know in South America, the people there like to put lemon with their meat. Their red meat brings out the flavor. It's very good for you. That meat is ready now, so I'm going to take it out. Just put it on top of your vegetables there. Let that sauce finish cooking.